Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we are going to try my tie-dye dry rub method. Some of you call it the dishpan method of applying some dye to dry yarn using awesome 100% cotton yarn. This is some sugar and I just totally ripped that. Some sugar and cream, 113 grams of 100% cotton. And you know, I'm not going to pre-soak this. We're just going to leave it dry and start rubbing this into some Tulip tie-dye that I had mixed today. I have 5 dye colors to work with today. And these are colors that, actually it's the same colors to start with that I used in the original sort of dry rub video that I did with sock yarn. But I hand wound this yarn on my Niddy Noddy to get this hank. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some colors. Let's start off with, I guess we got a little black. Let's do a little teal. And then we're going to start just dabbing and rubbing this yarn in these dyes to sort of soak it up. And this is a fun technique because we get a really uneven application of color on the yarn. And you can sort of take advantage of this by doing, like we could keep doing just teal and black in this section and then maybe transition into doing some other colors on another section of the yarn. And it's just a lot of fun. Yep. So here now, since I have them in some sort of different spots, we're going to get some more sort of variation. But the more dye you put in, then the more like deep spots you get. But it's, you know, when the dye gets lighter, say you rub some other parts of the yarn, you can get some really, really soft coverage on your yarn as you're doing this. And so it's just a really sort of, it's a very asymmetric technique. Actually, we're getting a lot of nice speckling with this. These cotton yarns can absorb, maybe I should just keep going with these 2 colors. I didn't really have much of a sense of what I wanted to do when I started off, but I'm sort of digging this teal and black. I feel like that these are not the standard colors that you might see on a cotton yarn, and of course with white as well. Now you could dye your yarn and then use this as an over dyeing technique to add some more colors, but there's a lot of different ways that you can play around with it. All right. You do want to try to make sure to sort of rotate the yarn so you're not, you know, you don't want this skein to be completely asymmetric. I mean, maybe you do. But you can notice that I'm always keeping sort of my left hand around the hank like so. And the reason why I'm doing this is that I'm trying to not keep some kind of order versus ending up with some kind of tangled mess here. But already this is looking really, really fun. So as you're doing it, you can, you know, be, I think, as random or as planned as you wanted. I've shown this now with these tie dyes and then with some acid dyes. So really, you know, as long as you have the conditions set up so that way your dyes will bind to whatever fiber you're using, and you know, maybe you don't want to do this with roving or something that you could have some felting, but you know, we could, are you supposed to go strand? Okay. You know, it is smarter to add some more ties onto your yarn, but you know, you can keep going until you have as much or as little coverage as you want. And I love yarns that really end up having this sort of hand appeal to the way you're doing it. And so it doesn't really matter if you let the yarn sort of sit in a spot for a while, but you know, sort of the longer the yarn comes into contact with the dye, the wetter the yarn gets. And the wetter the yarn is, the less, you know, you'll sort of see of some of these like light coverage. You'll start to get some more deeply saturated sections. But I'm actually getting really, really happy with this. Now, I've been rubbing it. You could, in theory, you know, add dye directly on top of it. It's just, you know, it will soak in. It's just sort of a different look. I mean, I suppose that you could also squirt some on your hand and then sort of like pat it on areas if you needed to apply some dye to a specific spot. But yeah, I mean, you can also, if you don't want the colors to be as intense, you can dilute them. So instead of, you know, start off with a tie-dye bottle that's half full and dilute the dye, so then you're only using half of it. And that can help you get some fun colors. Okay, so I'm now checking through. Basically, this is an asymmetric, non-repeating colorway that would be really, really fun as you knit up. But what I'm sort of checking for now are sections that have, you know, large sections of white that I might want to add a little more coverage to. But again, some of this is just fun with the randomness of this technique. Just looking through for anything glaring. But it's sort of fun that you can do as much or as little as you want. So just from that light touch, if the yarn is wet, I don't think you would see that light sort of splotchy coverage. That comes from the fact that the yarn is dry, so it's not just, the dye isn't immediately sort of sinking into the fibers. When I went to wash my hands, they were remarkably clean. But if I hold this up, you can see what a light coverage we have of this dye in areas. Now there's areas where it's more saturated, so we've got more deep color penetration, but you know, this is a very sort of unique, one-of-a-kind colorway. Now, if you wanted to do this kind of technique on multiple skeins of yarn, say you wanted to make a sweater or something, what I would do is pre-measure the amount of dye that you wanted to use in bottles. So if you wanted to use, like, say, a 1/4 cup of teal per skein of yarn, you can measure that, you know, make a big dye stock and measure it out. That way at least you're applying, I guess, equivalent volumes to each skein, but there will be some variation because this is a completely random application technique. All right, now I am going to take this yarn, and we don't need to wrap it up in plastic wrap or anything because, you know, since it's random, it doesn't really matter if any of the sections touch. We're not trying to keep the colors separate at all. But the cotton is actually really nice because, you know, if I were to touch it right now, a lot of that dye is just in our bag already. But I am going to close this up in a Ziploc bag. Just so that way, you know, it doesn't dry out completely. There is very little liquid in here, and just to kind of keep it protected. But I'm going to go set this aside, and then tomorrow we'll come back and wash our yarn. It has been 24 hours, and it's now time to wash our dry rubbed yarn. What I think is interesting is that if you look at the plastic bag, I don't see any color on it. Now, okay, obviously we've got some color bleeding right now, but the yarn is sort of like a sponge, like holding on to that liquid. I do think I want gloves for this part. And I'm curious if we'll observe any staining from this runoff that we're getting. This washing might take a little longer than normal because not only are we rinsing it out, but the yarn isn't wet. So we're also having to soak, I guess, this yarn for the first time. But nevertheless, I think that this is a stunning, stunning yarn, and I'm really, really curious to see how much of the color sort of sticks around. I'm not really talking much right now. But so I'm sort of, letting the water run over sections of the yarn. I really don't want to let this get, I guess I'm a little out of frame. So I'm just sort of like moving through our hank like this, which, is sort of helping, I think, fibers get a bit saturated as well. But I really don't want to tangle this. But it looks like we are going to end up with a black and teal, very unique, non-repeating colorway here. So I'm going to go ahead and add some Dawn dish soap. We're still seeing a lot of color bleeding, but this can help. We want to get as much of the unbound dye out as possible, especially so then it can be used. But you can see, we're still getting a fair amount of green. This is going to take some time, and what I don't want to do, what I absolutely do not want to do right now, is let this yarn soak in some of the runoff. Because if some of that dye is still active, we could really stain some of these white sections. And we probably already have. They're probably somewhat of a pale blue versus the white that we started with. Yeah, you can see that just already we've got some whites, some like pale blue spots. But if we were to let this soak in the runoff, then I think we would reduce sort of these pale patches. We'd add even more color to them. So I'm going to be changing the water frequently. I'm going to be changing the water frequently and continue rinsing this until the water runs clear, and then we'll hang it up to dry. Here is the finished dry yarn, and it is so cool. I can't believe that I didn't first try out this dry rub technique on a cotton yarn, that I did it on wool and sock yarns before trying it on the cotton yarn that these dyes are really intended for. We use the Tulip one-step tie-dye in a turquoise and black to dye this white base. And the black actually looks a lot more like a deep marine blue or hunter green, like a very, very navy green kind of shade. We don't really see a quote, true black here on this yarn. Now, recently, I have been exploring a lot more with heat setting these tulip dyes on yarns. But this yarn, I let sit in the more traditional way for 24 hours before rinsing it. So I wonder if I were to have steamed this yarn before rinsing it, if we would have gotten closer to a quote, true black. One of the things that this dry rub technique gave us was it allowed us to get this non-repeating speckled and splotched colorway with a lot of dimension, but we now have this colorway that is sort of a non-pooling one because these colors are randomly placed. Yes, they could pool in sections, but since the colors don't repeat around the hank, overall the color placement in the finished product will be a lot more random. The dry cotton yarn soaked up the dye so easily. I was actually pretty surprised that basically none of it was getting on my fingers or anything. It was pretty much the liquid was just really getting absorbed into the yarn. I think that there could be some differences if you were to do this with a cotton blend versus this 100% bleached cotton yarn. So it would be interesting to play around with this with some slight fiber variations. Ultimately, this is a stunning, one-of-a-kind cotton yarn, and I am so excited to explore more ways that we can dye cellulose-based fibers. And we really aren't limited to just hand painting with the squeeze bottles that these one-step dyes come in. There are some more ways that we can play around with it in yarn form and not just in blank form. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and if you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel. I release at least one new episode of the Dye Pot Weekly series every week, and I love to explore different ways to apply color to yarn. And I'm constantly pushing myself to put a little twist on some of my favorite techniques. If you would like to support ChemKnits on a more personal level, check out the ChemKnits Patreon. You can get exclusive behind-the-scenes sneak peeks, early access to new dyeing videos, input into some of the upcoming content, and more. Thank you so much for watching.